welcome once again to Linda Rose. And we've got to talk about hijacking today, which is hijacking of the Criminal Justice Bill. Now, there's some naughty people in the wings that keep coming back. Trojan horses spring to mind. Now, this is about abortion, Linda. Well, is the march still going ahead on the 15th?
Well, it's not a march, it's a rally. And yes, it's going ahead on the 15th on Parliament Square. And the reason for there's been some confusion about this, Rodney, is that the first day for the debate of the Criminal Justice Bill is scheduled for Wednesday. But Parliament have now said unexpectedly that they won't be debating amendments till the second day of the debate. And they haven't as yet announced when that second day is going to be, although we think it will probably be next week now. So they've kind of brought this in right at the last moment. But we felt it was a good idea to go ahead with the rally on Wednesday so that we can, make our voices heard early on, basically, and just, yes, lay down a marker. And if it's too far ahead when they do debate it, we might possibly hold a second rally.
Am I right to be suspicious that they put it back?
Who can say, Rodney? I mean, it does feel a little not helpful to, at the last minute, say that they're changing the date when they're going to be debating amendments. But who can say? Far be it from me to pass any sort of judgment on this.
Well, I'm going to ask you to put your barrister's hat on now and tell us about what's really behind this, because it looks quite innocuous. But as I say, people have drilled down into it, haven't they?
Yes, I mean, the problem is that the criminal justice bill has actually been hijacked by certain people who want to decriminalize abortion, basically. So they have tabled it's Diane Johnson and Stella Creasy have both tabled amendments to the bill, which will decriminalize abortion up to birth and which will decriminalize women procuring abortion with these, the pills that they send off for, even when it goes far beyond the time limit, because you're not supposed to use these beyond 10 weeks. But of course, there have been cases of some women using them as late as 24 weeks and beyond, which is, it is quite obviously aborting a viable live baby. And they have been charged, some of them. So one of the amendments is to decriminalize that completely. So again, it's just an attempt to literally to hijack the criminal justice bill to bring these measures in. But I should also say that on the plus side, Caroline Ansell has also put down an amendment. And she is saying that the time limit for abortion should be reduced from 24 weeks to 22 weeks. So I sort of think that she has done a kind of tit for tat. She's, again, I might be wrong in this, but it feels as if she's saying, well, okay, they're going to do it. We're going to do it. So it's not all bad news. We would support Caroline Ansell.
Well, even though it doesn't go as far as we would want, having said that, what you've just said is basically making Britain, at least in this sad sense, leaders in the world. Nobody's got laws like this. We'll be standing out there up to birth.
Well, of course, I think in Ireland at the moment, they, in theory, have it decriminalised up to birth, I think. I'd have to check that actually, Rodney. But yes, we are world leaders, pioneers, in the worst possible sense.
Yeah. Well, look, in all this, can you be frank and say who is behind it? Who's backing? Ms. Creasy has got some sort of reputation. Who's pushing her?
Well, I think the abortion lobby is very solidly behind her. So things like, Mary Stopes, British Pregnancy Advisory Service, whatever, all the big abortion providers are obviously backing these amendments to the hilt. And they have a real vested interest in promoting abortion. I mean, they're even on record a couple of years ago of one of their spokespeople saying that they wanted every woman in the country to have an abortion. So they've been behind a lot of the sex education too, and they will openly say that, I mean, it sounds absolutely extraordinary, but they want more and more young women to have sex and to get pregnant because, of course, it fills their coffers. I mean, it's absolutely extraordinary the way that this whole industry seems to be constructed and the way it is a for-profit industry. You know, there's no suggestion that this is actually caring for vulnerable young women and girls who need help at a moment of crisis. It's a real industry here, and they're making millions from it.
Yeah, it seems so. If we're talking about this and thinking about age groups here, have you got any statistics, the difference between pro and anti-abortion, between, let's say, Gen Z and older folk?
That's an interesting question. I think that public opinion is shifting rather a lot in recent years. And certainly, one of the latest reports I read that 56% of the population now say that abortion is far too readily available and the time limit is far too high. Because now, you know, routinely babies are surviving at 22 weeks and some are surviving as early as 20 weeks. So, you know, you say to Joe Public, yeah, but did you know that abortion up to 24 weeks is now permitted? And of course, that's extraordinary. That really is killing a baby that can live by itself. So I think the public in general is waking up to the fact that this actually is not right. It is killing another human being. So we are seeing a shift. And the latest abortion figures, the abortion rate for teenagers was in fact down a little bit, whereas it had gone up for women, I think, over 30. And again, this is interesting. Um, I think there's a whole host of reasons for that. I suspect the younger generation, we are told they are not, some of them are not having sex as frequently as they did. I'm not sure if that's actually right, but I think that there are certain sexual practices that a lot of them are adopting, which will not facilitate conception, if I can put it delicately like that. And that is becoming more and more of a norm as a way of avoiding pregnancy rather than just, you know, straightforward contraception, which still does be a bit problematic, although, you know, there is widespread use of contraception. So I think it's a very mixed picture, actually, Rodney.
Where does the Muslim community come into this? They would help, I would think, with the statistics, in that there would be less abortion with their population increasing.
Yes, the Muslim community does not favor abortion at all. And also, of course, they will not favor premarital sex for young girls. They would say they wouldn't do it for young boys too, but I'm not sure that's completely right, to be perfectly honest. So yes, that's an interesting cultural difference, if you like. And given that our abortion rates are so high, I think that is, given that they do tend to be quite careful and hardline and protective of their girls and their babies, I think that's saying something quite distressing about the white community in this country that do tend to be very sexually lax and very permissive, and promiscuity seems to have been so promoted amongst them in recent years and seems to have been taken on board. And of course, you know, the whole sex and relationships teaching, which is now, you know, pushing the whole gender choice, gender orientation, so that a lot of young people are now self-identifying as the opposite sex, but a huge number are also now, Rodney, identifying as binary, which of course means that they're going to have sex with both, young men, young women, whatever. And I think it's quite alarming that we are seeing such a high rate of young people now saying they are non-binary. And of course, if you look at the Eurovision Song Contest, you saw that so reflected, because the person who won it, Nemo, identifies as non-binary, and the Irish entrant, who identifies as goodness knows what, I mean, a witch amongst other things, but she also says she's non-binary. And actually, I would get into terrible trouble for saying she, because I see the national press, they've very carefully said they all the time. I read that first off and I thought, has she got a backing group? Because naive as I am, I sort of thought that there was a whole group of people there. Oh yeah, that's naughty of me. Sorry.
Well, we're going to talk about the Eurovision Song Contest hopefully next week, because it's, we both believe, a mirror of what is happening in society. And there are fascinating things going on there. I, for one, have never watched in years, but this time I looked at some of the songs beforehand. I couldn't see or hear a tune. I thought, well, I'll watch the voting, and my goodness me, we'll save that. We'll move on to another subject before we go. And that is, well, a bit of an old horse chestnut, really, in Christian terms. This debate has been going on for years, but has now reared its head again, and it's about preaching the gospel. There are two mighty schisms in the Christian church at the moment. One is, of course, between the liberals, anything goes, and the traditionalists, whereby they actually believe in the good old dusty book, the Bible. That's one major. But the other one is, and growing, is that we're instructed as Christians to preach the gospel to all nations. But there is a growing amount of people now saying, well, yeah, absolutely, we agree with that, but we've also got to influence things perhaps through politics, through joining societies and getting down to the level that most people are in. Now, politics is probably leading estate agents in people's views at the moment as a negative, closely followed by lawyers. I've got to mention that to you, of course. But we've got a situation here that is causing a division. Should we keep our mouths shut? We should only be interested in preaching the gospel. I mean, many people have said that about Justin Welby. Get preaching the gospel. Stay out of politics. Which is the right attitude?
We are called to preach the gospel. The church is called to preach the gospel, to look after the faithful, to search after the lost, to bind up the wounded, to care for them. It is called to uphold the truth, and it's called to be a beacon of light in society. Now, that to me says that we are called to stand in society and proclaim the word of God, and to be that moral beacon to show the way. So Christians, actually, I believe, you don't have a choice about this. If you love Christ and are following Christ, you are called to make your voice heard in society as well. And that's not, giving way to the things of the world and becoming involved in things you shouldn't be. No, God cares about society. God cares about justice. He cares about every aspect of life. So we, as his servants, are called to follow his will, to enforce what he wants in our society. So we must have a voice, but it must be a Christian voice. And I do have to say, Rodney, that I have no sympathy with Christians who say, well, I'm going to go into politics. I'm going to do this because you're really spot on there. And I agree, heart, mind, and soul. But of course, until I get power, I can't do anything. So I'm going to get in there and I'm gonna keep my head down, keep a low profile until I get into a position of real power. And at that point, I'll start to proclaim Christian values. No, they won't. You have got to, from the beginning, stand on your values, our Christian values, without compromise. In love, you don't have to go and beat people up, but you have to stand on those values without compromise. Of course, this affects every area of life, but you mustn't get diverted. And I see, a lot of people get involved in what they call the peace movement, or they used to years ago, and that somehow becomes their gospel. It's not. What we have always to remember is that Christ must be at the heart. We follow Christ. So in all things, we must be a Christian voice within the issues of the day, but we mustn't get diverted into thinking that the issues of the day are somehow God. And I've seen this so often happening with the whole climate change debate these days, with some Christians saying, we've got to stand to protect the climate, we've got to lower our carbon emissions, we've got to do all the rest of it. And they've lost sight of God. As Christians, one of our primary things is to care for the planet. That's why we were made. Go out, care for all creation. Of course, we've got to do that. And we've got to act responsibly. But we do that under God, proclaiming that God is the creator, He is sovereign. Jesus Christ, His Son, is the way, the truth, and the life. And that is something that in our society today and in politics today has become so lost. It's become buried in all the mud of the multiculturalism and multi-religion and all the rest of it. No, so it's a very narrow path. Christians must be involved in this because we are called to care for those who are in poverty, for those who are disadvantaged, for those who are abused, for the marginalized. Christ loved us enough to come take on human form to be there with us. So we have to follow that now and incarnate His love in all these areas. But we must never become confused by seeing those areas as God. I hope I'm making myself clear here, because this is something I feel passionately about.
Yeah, you are. Another question related to this. The equality of MPs seems to be a disaster compared with what they used to be. Everything seems rose-coloured spectacles better in the past, but certainly this lot are, because maybe diversity, inclusivity, equality has crept in, as it has done practically everywhere. You have to have quotas, same number of men and women. BAME comes into this, of course. The equality of MP now is nowhere near what it used to be. They didn't used to let you carry notes in House of Commons. Indeed, now everybody does. Having said that, somebody's told me, informed, that there are more Christians in Parliament than there used to be. Is that true?
There's a very high number of Christians in Parliament at the moment, Rodney, which in theory ought to be terribly encouraging. But I think, sadly, a lot of them are just terrified these days to put their head above the parapet. And you can understand, because they get so attacked and vilified and bullied if they dare voice anything that sounds even remotely Christian. So they don't. So there are very few MPs who are very brave and who do stand up. And I'd cite the example of Nick Fletcher, who I think is admirable, and who actually, before Easter, he held a meeting for MPs to tell them about what Easter meant and proclaim the gospel. And I thought, whoa, when I heard that, that is just wonderful. But so many of them are scared. And looking at this with compassion, you have to understand that there is a huge, and I will say this, a quite vicious group within Parliament pushing LGBT ideology, pushing abortion, pushing anti-Christian sentiment, pushing the multiculturalism, and they go for anybody and they give no quarter. And it is well, it's heartbreaking actually, but we've moved a long way. And I think I can't help when you introduce that topic and talking about how the quality of MPs seems to have changed. I think one of the problems is that these days, okay, we've got these pressure groups, but we've also got a problem that to be an MP these days is a job. So, you know, you kids will grow up saying, oh, I want to be an MP. And that's actually, it's a very career choice. You know, it has pay structure, you'll get a pension, you get all, you know, all the perks. So people are going into it as a job. Whereas years back, people, they had jobs. They were often very well established. They did this, took on this role because they cared about society and wanted to serve. And we have lost that that ethos of public service. I think Plato years ago in I might have this wrong, so don't jump on me if I have, but I think he actually said that people holding public office should never be paid from the public purse because they had to be impartial and they had to be doing it for the right reasons. And if you're doing it for profit, those reasons kind of went. But today we have made it's a job. And of course, we have to have equality and diversity. You have to be allowed to breastfeed in Parliament. I'm sorry, I'm a woman. I think, you know, breastfeeding is great, but there are places to do it. And I honestly don't think the chamber of the House of Commons is the right place to breastfeed. But you know, we've brought in all these other things because we want to be inclusive and all the rest of it. And in fact, we are one of the most profoundly intolerant societies that there has ever been. This is the result of these policies, and it's terrifying.
Are you glad that the Garrick Club has fallen to the persuasions of the women?
Oh dear. Well, I think it's nice that the Garrick Club is now open to women. I don't.
Well, he
I know
once said he
someone.
always has been as visitors. They can,
Yeah.
yeah. But Douglas Murray's made a comment that is rather interesting, well, to the point. The ladies should pay their attention to the mosques and try and get the mosques free of men only, not the Garrick Club.
Well, wouldn't that be something? Yeah. I think inclusivity and diversity extends to everyone, everywhere, except to mosques and to
Well, finally, we've got to mention that the Christians, again, are the persecuted ones, inverted commas, in this country, because we're supposed to be as protected as Muslims, as LGBT, or the other minority groups, but we're not. Now, is that down to a spiritual thing, battle? Or is it simply down to the fact that Christians don't raise their heads above the proverbial parapet? And it's about time they did and became salt.
I think there's a yes to everything you just said there, Rodney, even though that seems a bit contradictory. There is obviously a spiritual battle going on because the devil doesn't like the things of God, doesn't like Christ, and will try and suppress anything. So it's obviously at that level, it's a spiritual battle. I think part of the other problem, though, is that for centuries, you know, we've been a Christian country. So now everybody says, well, you're so, you know, deeply embedded and you've been privileged for so long. And, you know, it's only right other people have a chance. So they say you can't possibly be persecuted because you're privileged, you're entrenched, you're all the rest of it. And of course, that's not the reality at all. And there is so much discrimination being leveled, and this it impacting on our freedom of faith. That's what's at root here, because they are not allowing Christians to express Christian beliefs, to live out our Christian faith. So, yeah, this is a growing problem in this country, and under the equality laws, it shouldn't be, because you're quite right, religion is a protected characteristic. So we should have absolute freedom to be able to say what our beliefs are as based on the Bible. We should be free to quote from the Bible. We should be free to pray wherever we want. And if we offer prayer to somebody else, everybody has the right to say no thanks if they don't want it. But we should not be penalized and criminalized because we dare pray. So there is a terrible, real spirit of discrimination in this country. And I saw in the news only this weekend that I think it's called David Campanale, a Liberal Democrat candidate who's just been removed, deselected, not because he's done anything sexually wrong, not because he's been pilfering from the public purse, not because he's, I don't know, because he's a Christian. Now, there is something very rotten at the core of this society when Christians can be so picked on and marginalized and excluded because we follow Christ.
Well, you wouldn't do that to us Muslim and get away with it.
I think there are several reasons for that. And I think one of them, it has to be said that if you do anything to insult Islam, you stand a real danger of having physical violence against you. So I think that's one of the reasons why people tend to tiptoe around Islam in this country, because they know there'll be a real vicious backlash. But of course, Christians, because we do love each other, that's what Christ calls us to. We do turn the other cheek. So, hey, you know what? You can say what you want to Christians, but don't say it to Islam because they'll get cross. And they really do. So again, we're kind of victims of our belief to that extent. Now, it is right that we do all things in love, but it is also right that we stand without fear and proclaim in the public square our belief, and we stand on that, come hell or high water.
Well, she's mentioned climate change then, and hell, but we won't take that up. We will leave this till next week. I can confidentially or unconfidentially say we're both as mad about the Eurovision thing, but you'll have to wait, for the article, big long one that Linda has written for this weekend, and next weekend we're going to dissect it and really go to town. Linda, it's been a joy. We'll see you shortly.
Thank you, Rodney. It has indeed been a joy. See you soon.